Welcome back again. Lecture number 8 for the reproductive system. We're going to move on to the female side of things. And just like we did with the males, I'm going to start off with an overview of the key structures of the female's reproductive system. And all right, so in the males, the testes are the primary organs of the reproductive system, the primary sex organs. In the female, those are going to be the ovaries. And the ovaries are going to be the structures that produce the female gametes, which are called ova. Ovum is singular. Now, generally, we're going to be referring to these as oocytes. Oocytes are the immature versions of the ova. An ovum is a fully mature, which means it has completed meiosis. It's done both stages of meiosis. But interestingly, that only happens if fertilization occurs, as we'll see. So there aren't very many fully formed ova that develop in a female. You got to have fertilization by a sperm to make that happen. So because of that, most of the time we're going to be talking about these cells that lead to ova, and those are called oocytes. And it is oocyte, it's not oocyte. The ovaries, in addition to producing these oocytes, they also secrete the important female sex hormones, which include estrogen. Estrogen is a catch-all term, so you will see there's more than one type of estrogen. You'll see people refer to estrogens. There are versions that are just a little bit chemically different from each other, and estradiol is the key one. Estrone, estriol, and progesterone. So we'll mainly be talking about these estrogens and progesterone and their key roles in reproduction. The female reproductive system includes a series of ducts, and these ducts are can be quite a bit larger than they are in a male. So just because we're talking about a duct, remember that's a passageway that has space on the inside. So the fallopian tubes in a female, those are analogous to the vas deferens tubes in a male because they extend from the ovaries toward the uterus, much like the vas deferens extends from a testis in the male towards the penis. And the uterus is also technically a reproductive duct, even though we don't usually consider it a duct because it's more of an oval-shaped organ. And of course, the uterus is where a developing embryo will implant and develop during a pregnancy. And then finally, the vagina is technically a duct, one of these reproductive ducts as well. All right, and then just like with the male, we have internal structures and female structures. You have the same thing in the female. The internal genitalia are located in the pelvic cavity and include the ovaries, uterine tubes. Another name for the uterine tubes are the fallopian tubes. That's more commonly what they're called. The uterus and the vagina, all of those are internal. And the external genitalia include various external structures. The collective name for all of those structures, as we've talked about over on the anatomy videos for the unit, is called the vulva in a female. So the labia, majora and minora, and the other structures that are located there on the external part of the female anatomy, which are collectively referred to as the vulva. All right, and here's a cross-section diagram in a female. And again, I'm not going to rehash all of this, but this is giving you a perspective on one ovary. You can kind of see it right there, part of it. And then here's your fallopian tube or your uterine tube. Oviduct is another name for that. So oocytes that are ready to be released come out of the ovary and travel through the fallopian tube. And then from there, they will enter the uterus. Now, if the egg got fertilized, then it's going to try to attach to the endometrium of the uterus over here. It's going to implant there and develop into an embryo and later a fetus. If it does not, then it's just going to pass out during menstruation. Okay, and then here's the vagina, right in here. And the vagina is an internal structure, that internal passageway. The external female anatomy is not referred to as the vagina. Collectively, all of the external structures are called the vulva. Okay, and then you can see how this is positioned. So that we're looking at a cross-section over here of this female. So she's standing in anatomical position. So here's the bladder, and here's the urethra, as we were taking a look at when we were covering the urinary system. So if a female is standing up in anatomical position, the urethra is anterior to the vagina. And then back in here, this is the rectum in cross section, and then here's the anus over here, and the sphincters of the anus. So the anus and the rectum are posterior to the vagina and the uterus. All right, here's another view about how these things are laid out in a female. In this view, here's our uterus, right in here. This part of the uterus that leads to the vagina here, most of which has been cut off, that is your cervix portion. Again, all this is being covered over on the anatomy side for the unit. Here's an ovary. Here's your uterine tube or fallopian tube. You got one of those on each side. The fallopian tube and the ovary do not actually physically make contact. These little finger-like projections, that's called those are called the fimbriae. They reach out and kind of wrap around the ovary, but don't actually physically contact it. But they're there to receive an oocyte that is being released by the ovary. And notice also what they've drawn in here, all these kind of grayish tissues. Those are various ligaments, such as the broad ligament, which help hold all these structures together. So you don't want your ovaries and your fallopian tubes just flopping around all over the place inside the abdominopelvic cavity. And if you're using a 3D anatomy app like Visible Body or one of the others, you can, those are generally really good at illustrating for you these various ligaments, which are dense connective tissue that help hold these structures in place. And some of them are actually not dense connective tissue, they're actually double folds of the peritoneal membranes that are helping to hold these structures in place as well. And blood vessels are located within those ligaments, blood vessels that are bringing a blood supply to these tissues, and even like right in here you can see the ureter right there is passing through those ligaments as well. Okay, all right, so just kind of a quick overview, refresher on the female reproductive anatomy. If it's been a couple of days or whatever since you did the reproductive anatomy video lectures. And so for lecture number 9, we're going to move on and take a look inside the ovaries and see what's going on in there. They're a little more complicated than what's going on inside the testes in a male. So that'll be the topic for lecture number 9.